let's take a few minutes to settle our minds in the present, the here and now, in case they've wandered away. And then take a few more moments to renew the motivation that you generated earlier today. That's your reason for being here, listening, learning, practicing, discussing. To really try your best to open your heart to other people, other beings with compassion and love and the wish to help them, and the wish to learn ways in which you can be more beneficial to others now and also in a more long-term sense. So yesterday, Venerable Rinchen asked a question related to the description of White Tara, how she has all the, what does it say? Signs and marks of a Buddha. Yeah, so a Buddha, the form of a Buddha is said to have these special signs and marks, 32 major and, is it 108? No, 32 and 80. I can't remember. Anyway, lots of different marks and signs. And one of the signs, one of the major signs, number 13, is that the complete enjoyment body of a Buddha, the Sambhogakaya, has a secret organ retracted in a sheath like that of the elephant and the wise horse. And the cause of that, each of these marks and signs is the result of having done certain practices over a long period of time, creating a lot of merit. And the cause of that one is safeguarding secret words without divulging them to others. And so it kind of sounds like this is talking about a male organ, in which case it seems to leave out females. Although in the book Courageous Compassion, which is volume 6, I think, volume 6, it mentions there it doesn't mention all the marks, but the 32 major marks are mentioned. And for this one, it's explained a little bit differently. It says the private organ is recessed and remains concealed. This is caused by strictly keeping the pledges of secrecy and safeguarding the confidential words of others. So that sounds a little more, like, not necessarily male, but otherwise, yeah, often sounds like it's you're talking about a male body. And so I said I would look up. I remember reading in a transcript a student asking this question to Geshe Jampa Gyatso, who was the teacher in Lama Tsongkhapa Institute in Italy many years ago. And and so, yeah, the question was, it sounds like, this is related to a male body. Does that mean women cannot attain enlightenment? So Geshe-la said, a woman's secret organ is present but not visible. Thus, all the signs can exist in a female Buddha. So his way of interpreting this was, yeah, this can refer to a female body as well, because it's also hidden. Yeah. But then he went on to say, from the point of view of sutra, it appears that only males can become Buddhas. But from the point of view of Tantra, there are both male and female Buddhas. In Sutra, it says that when female bodhisattvas move from the path of preparation to the path of seeing, their gender changes. So the path of seeing is the point at which one attains the direct realization of emptiness. So you, after spending a lot of time listening to teachings, meditating on emptiness, getting a conceptual realization of emptiness, and you keep meditating, and then at some point your understanding of emptiness changes from conceptual to non-conceptual, direct non-conceptual realization of emptiness. That's the meaning of the path of seeing, the point of attaining the path of seeing. So it's a really important milestone in the path. That's when you become an Arya, and from then on, it's like guaranteed that you will go all the way to Buddhahood. And so he says, in Sutra, apparently it says, if you're a female bodhisattva, when you attain the path of seeing, your gender changes. I would like to see that. I mean, the sutra, I would like to see. Well, it would also be interesting to see that change happening. But yeah, which sutra says that? And then we're also taught that among sutras, among passages in sutras, there's some that are definitive and some that are interpretable or provisional. You can't take them literally, but they need to be interpreted. So that's something, maybe someone would like to volunteer to do research into that.
Can we understand in the way that a female change gender when she attains the path of seeing, that in the way that she has no trace of a female feature? It means she's still in the body of a female, but she has no trace of female characteristic. Because a female, how to say, is depicted in the sutra that a female had likely to have a lot of defects more than male.
Well,
And
that's
then,
also questionable.
Then
Yeah.
when she attains the path of seeing, she won't have any trait of female characteristic.
Yeah. Well, that's also something controversial. Yeah, some have this idea that in the sutras it said women have all these faults, but that's also questionable. Because I asked Bhikkhu Bodhi, who's a scholar who translated all or most of the Pali sutras into English, and I asked him if there's any passages in there about women being inferior, and he said no. So I don't know. I question. He said the Buddha was completely like, what's the word? Like treating men and women equally. Yeah, equanimous with regard to men and women. He didn't point out like women having more faults than men. He did, of course, point out we all have afflictions. All men and women have afflictions, but not that women have more than men. So I question that. Um,
Well, don't beings take a body of light by the path of seeing?
Yes, that's true. It's said that when you attain the path of seeing, your body, this body of flesh and blood, transforms into a body of the nature of mind, a body of the nature of mind. And yeah, they say it's like a subtle body made of light. But, it, does that mean it has to transform into a different type of body, like gender wise? But I also looked it up in volume 1, Approaching the Buddhist Path. There's a section in there about the equality of women, and His Holiness is emphasizing that women are equal to men. There should be no discrimination on the basis of gender. However, he does say that Sutrayana and the 3 lower tantras state that one has to have a male body in the final life before attaining Buddhahood. But in Tibetan Buddhism, highest yoga tantra is the final authority. And here, females and males are equally capable of attaining full awakening. So there's different points of view in different scriptures by different masters and so on. And also in Vasubandhu's Abhidharmakosha, Treasury of Knowledge, in chapter 6, where it's explaining the different paths, the way you progress to liberation and enlightenment and progress through the various paths. He also has a similar kind of statement. He says, there it says that, when you achieve the path of seeing, if you're female, then your organ transforms into that of a male. And Geshe Jamba Gyatso's explanation was that this is the assertion of the Vaibhashika school, the Vaibhashika tenet system. And in the Prasangika Madhyamaka school and the Tantra teachings, there's no difference between men and women in terms of the attainment of enlightenment, and that all are able to attain the path of superiors. And somebody asked him, why is it the Vaibhashikas say this? And he said, perhaps it had to do with the culture in India at the time the Buddha gave teachings. Yeah. But I also have doubt about this because in the story of the Buddha's mother, Gotami, it said that when the Buddha returned to his hometown, after attaining enlightenment and starting to teach, he eventually went back to his hometown and visited his family, his parents. And when his mother, Gotami, heard teaching from the Buddha, the first time she heard him give teachings, she became a stream mentor, meaning that's the path of seeing, meaning she had the direct realization of emptiness. So if it was true, what these scriptures say, she would have become a man, and then there wouldn't have been all this issue about becoming getting ordained. She could have become a bhikshu. She could have become a monk. But that's not in the stories, right? There's no mention of her becoming a man and then being able to just go right into the sangha as a bhikshu. And also many of the Buddha's female disciples attained, not just Arya, but also Arhat. They became Arhats. And again, I've read nothing about them, turning into men. They continued to be women and bhikshunis, fully ordained nuns, and living with the community. So I think that, the Buddha himself said we need to investigate his words. We need to investigate scriptures and not just take them blindly. And the Dalai Lama also encourages that very much. That, I mean, he himself, with Vasubandhu's text, he says some of the things in that text we simply cannot accept. For example, the explanation of the world system, Mount Meru, and so on. you know, with our ability to investigate the world scientifically, we can see that that obviously isn't the case. So, yeah, if we find something in the scriptures that doesn't make sense, that doesn't fit with, you know, our experience and the experience of others, then we don't have to accept it. So, Venerable Rinchen, is that okay? But yeah, I think it would be helpful to do further investigation into this issue. But yeah, I think a lot of it does have to do with the culture in India at the time of the Buddha and also after the Buddha, because it seems the Buddha himself was egalitarian. He accepted women. He said women have the ability to become enlightened, and many of his disciples did become enlightened. But it seems that after he passed away, some of the male um, um, beings who continued the teachings, they didn't have such an open mind. Yeah, they had not such attitudes, and there did come into the teachings, into the traditions, discrimination against women. But hopefully we can change that, and it is changing. And the Dalai Lama himself is completely for change. Um, Doing his best to bring women up to the equal level of men. Like in Tibet, women didn't have the chance for education. A lot of women weren't even able to read, much less get religious education. So in the years since the Dalai Lama and others left Tibet, um, women and particularly nuns have been able to study the same study program as the monks, and now are getting the degree of Geshe, professor. There's, I don't know how many now, there's a few hundred, but more all the time are graduating with that degree. So this is wonderful. This is amazing. So things are happening slowly, slowly. Okay, so were there any questions that came up during your discussion period that you would like to ask? Didn't get resolved? Matt, wait, use the microphone.
Just a clarification about when Gotami became a stream enter, and you mentioned she entered the path of seeing. So did she become did she have a chance to become a bodhisattva or after that, or did she just go to arahatship?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't come across any mention of her entering the bodhisattva path. So the traditional, it's mostly, I think, from the Pali tradition and Vinaya scriptures that there's information about her, about the Buddha's mother. And yeah, it just seems that she became an arhat during that life. No mention of the bodhisattva's path. So, yeah, I haven't come across that information. I mean, I think at the time of the Buddha, most of the disciples, at least the ones we hear about and we have stories of, yeah, they were following the path to nirvana, the Shravaka, hearer path, and so their goal was attaining nirvana. I think it's only in the Mahayana scriptures that there's talk of bodhisattva disciples around the Buddha, but I don't think you read about those in the Pali scriptures and in the Vinaya and so on. So it seems like everyone at that time was aiming for nirvana. Anyway, yeah, I'm not a scholar, so I don't have the ability to go into all the scriptures and understand all these points, but that's as much as I know. Okay, so yesterday I showed a slide and proposed that the way we respond to things like a loss of a loved one or other kinds of tragic experiences could be affected by our worldview, the way we think about the world. And so this is my own idea, and so you don't have to agree with me. Yeah, just something that made sense to me, but it may not make sense to you. But it seems to me that, yeah, somebody who holds a Christian or theistic worldview would respond to a tragic experience in a different way than a person who holds a Buddhist worldview or a person who holds a more scientific, materialistic worldview. So I think, everyone would experience sadness and grief and other kinds of emotions coming up, but the way they manage that experience, the way they think about it, the perspective they take on it would probably be different. Does that make sense? Yeah. Yeah. So that's one, um, kind of perspective, how we understand life, why we're here, where we come from, how we got here, and so on. And then another idea that I had on the next slide is, what is the purpose of life? Yeah, so I think most people probably wonder about this sometimes, and some people come up with an answer to that. Other people don't. They just go through life kind of confused about, what are we doing here? What are we supposed to be doing? What is the purpose of this all? But I think, yeah, having a sense of purpose in life could be another factor that would affect how we respond to an experience of loss. And so I came up with a number of possible views about what is the purpose of life. So one is to experience as much happiness and pleasure as possible. This is sort of a hedonistic view, but there are people who see life that way. Just have as much fun, as many wonderful experiences, as much pleasure as you possibly can. And so I'm not sure. I haven't really sat down and talked to somebody who has that kind of view, but I could imagine that if you have that sort of view about life, then when you lose a loved one or have some other sort of tragic experience, it would be very shattering, very devastating, and very confusing as well. This doesn't fit in with your notions about what should happen in life. And so for some, it might cause them to think about things that they never thought about before, question things, and they might become interested in spirituality. That's possible. On the other hand, some people might just respond by running away, trying to escape from the pain with alcohol, drugs, entertainment, and so on. And I'm saying that partly because I once met a young man who told me this, very, very sad story. He was married, and he and his wife had this little boy. I think it was a boy. And little boy fell into the swimming pool and drowned. This was their only child, and I think they must have been both quite young, maybe in their early 20s. And the two of them responded very differently to this this tragedy. So he um, became interested in meditation and spirituality and started looking into spiritual teachings, meditation, spiritual path. And but his wife, on the other hand, just like seemed to want to escape from the pain. So she wanted to just spend her time with friends, going to the pub, drinking, just like getting away from the pain. And so they had very different ways of dealing with this tragedy, and eventually it led them to separate because they were going in very different directions. So it does happen. Yeah, it definitely happened to them that one person became more interested in spirituality. He may have already been interested before that, but this kind of led him more in that direction, whereas the other person just couldn't handle the pain and just wanted to get away from it with pleasure. Then for some, the purpose of life, it would be to live according to one's religious beliefs, following, for example, following commandments from God. So a lot of people in the world do follow a religion, Christianity, Islam, Judaism, and Hinduism, and so on, where there's a belief in a God and some sort of ethical system. And so for them, the purpose of life is to live according to the teachings, the guidelines of their religion, according to their religious beliefs. And so when such people experience loss or tragedy, they probably just continue to follow their spiritual practices, go to church or synagogue or temple, and maybe they seek help for their sorrow from their priest or pastor or rabbi, and so on. And hopefully this will give them some comfort and help. And then even when they recover sufficiently from their grief, they might even volunteer to help others who are going through similar experiences. Having been through it themselves, they're in a better position to help others who are grieving. And so many religions do have teachings about the importance of preparing for death, like, just realizing that we are not going to be here forever. We're going to, die at some point, and the need to live our life from that perspective so that we live a good life and we prepare for what comes next, which is usually heaven, if you're following your religion properly, and avoid hell, which would happen if you're not following properly. So I think that, yeah, this is how someone who's following one of those religions would deal with a tragedy like death of a loved one. And there are people who may not be following any particular religion, but have a lot of compassion and the wish to help relieve the suffering of others. So there's a lot of people engaging, even like full time, in humanitarian work, just putting all their time and energy into relieving the suffering of others. And so I would think that, yeah, people like that are very much aware of suffering and of death and tragedy, and probably have skills and experience in helping others who are going through those experiences, like people who are dying and grieving and so forth. And that their experiences, their knowledge, their skills would hopefully be helpful to they themselves when they're experiencing the loss of a loved one, but not necessarily, because I read a story of a woman who she worked as an ER nurse, and so she was quite accustomed to horrific injuries and death and trauma and so on. So this was very much, 8 hours a day or whatever, dealing with that. So she was quite familiar with that. But then she had the experience of a brother being diagnosed with a terminal illness. And that just threw her into an experience of grief. Yeah. So she found she didn't have the tools, the ability to deal with it when it was happening to somebody who was close to her. So that was kind of a wake up call for her. And yeah, it just shows that having experience in a certain area is no guarantee that when it's happening to you, it's one thing when it's happening to strangers, yeah, people you don't have a close emotional connection with, but when it's happening to somebody you're close to, a member of your family, then it's another thing. And also that this book that I mentioned, It's Okay That You're Not Okay, the author of that is, she's a psychotherapist, and she said she had been, she had counseled many people who had experienced grief, and she thought she had a pretty good understanding of the process of grieving and how to deal with grieving and so on. But when it happened to her, when her partner died suddenly, then she realized she was completely unprepared for that. And she also realized that the advice that she had been giving to her clients, her patients, was not really appropriate. So really kind of changed her perspective about things. And then the last one here is thinking that the purpose of our life is to develop our potential for liberation and full awakening. And so this is the Buddhist view about the purpose and meaning of life. So probably most of you are familiar with that, like the Buddha's teachings about the Four Noble Truths, the precious human life, the Bodhisattva path, and so on. So learning about those teachings and feeling, yeah, that makes sense to me, that feels right to me, that's what I want to do. And so taking that on as one's reason for living and doing the things we do. And so, those of us who are following that path, we listen to teachings, reflect on them, study them. So doing that causes us to view life differently so that we know that life is impermanent, everyone will die, and that we need to focus on Dharma practice. That's the purpose of our life, is to practice Dharma, create the causes for these higher states of mind, like liberation, enlightenment, and so on, and then help others as much as we can. So having that view of life and the meaning and purpose of life, we'll probably still feel a certain amount of grief when we lose a loved one, but probably less than someone who has never done those, who's never listened to those teachings, thought about those things, meditated on those things, and so on. So I think, those activities do help us be more prepared for when we do have such a loss. And also, we're also encouraged, like what I read from Geshe Dado's words this morning, instead of kind of getting absorbed in our sorrow and sadness and grief, to do whatever we can to benefit the one who passed away, in terms of prayers and practices, dedication of merit, making offerings on their behalf, and so on. So there's things we can do to help that person. Usually it's someone we cared about and we may have received a lot of benefit from, so it's only natural that we want to help them at that time. And I think that helps too, if you can put your energy into constructive things, positive things, virtuous things. I think that alleviates the grief rather than feeling, otherwise you can feel kind of helpless and useless. Like you want to do something, you don't know what to do. So we have a lot of things we can do in response to such a loss. So even though in our tradition we do these various activities like listening to teaching, studying, meditating, and so on, and familiarizing ourselves with things like impermanence and death, it's not too difficult to understand these things on the intellectual level. But when it comes to our heart level or gut level, where we experience emotions, that it's harder to have those ideas filter down so that on the emotional level we can sustain those experiences and not overreact. So I think if we do have strong emotions coming up like grief, sadness, and so on, we shouldn't be surprised or shocked or feel ashamed of ourselves and could be critical of ourselves. I think it's really important to be compassionate to ourselves. So these are just some possible ideas about what is the purpose of our life. Why are we here? Can you think of any others that aren't included here? Any other views about life that people might have? It's coming.
For my the grandmother, that generation, it sounded like the purpose of their life is to raise children and for the children, the family to be okay. As long as the family is okay, everything is, they don't think too much. And some people think of is to pass genes.
Pass on their genes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's another. Maybe that fits into number 3, benefiting others, serving others, even if it's only your family and not the world. But a lot of people see their role as taking care of others. Yeah. That doesn't always work either. I remember, hearing about people who spend their lives taking care of their family and kind of suppressing their own needs and wishes. But then at a certain point in their life, they start to feel bitter and unhappy because they didn't get what they wanted and they didn't get what they needed and so on. And then, maybe feeling some resentment towards family and friends. So if you're doing that in a wholehearted way, if you're really wholehearted, happily taking care of others, then that's fine. But if you're kind of suppressing, hiding your own needs and wishes, then those might come up later, and that you could end up feeling even bitter and angry at the end of your life. Your own needs and wishes didn't get fulfilled. It's possible, yeah? So when it comes to the purpose of life, it's a big question. And I don't think anyone can tell us what we should make. I sometimes get that question when I'm teaching. People sometimes ask, what's the purpose of life? And I said, I can't tell you. You have to figure that out for yourself. That's the best way, is if we explore that question ourselves and decide for ourselves what feels right, what sounds right, what we want to make as the purpose of our life. Then it's really coming from our heart. We're able to really put our energy into that. So these are just a few possibilities, a few ideas about why we are here. But I think, the point I'm making here is that depending on how we see the purpose of life, what we believe is the reason for being here, then that could also affect how we respond to a tragic experience like the loss of a loved one, an important person, or some other sort of tragedy, or being diagnosed with a terminal illness ourselves. So, yeah, it is important to have a good, clear sense of purpose in life. Otherwise, we could be really confused and really have additional suffering when we face a tragedy, because we wonder, what's this all about? And yeah, this may be why people sometimes commit suicide. They thought life was supposed to be wonderful and happy and there shouldn't be any bad things happening. And when a bad thing happens, they don't know how to manage it. So they just want to end it all. So, yeah, the Buddhist perspective, it's just natural that bad things happen. This is samsara. And everyone goes through bad experiences. However, we also have this view, and I'll talk about this more later, that bad experiences aren't necessarily bad. It all depends on our mind, how we think about them and how we work with them. And there's this whole area of teachings and practices known as transforming problems or transforming adversity into the path. So, painful experiences like the loss of a loved one, if we know how to work with that, that can actually help us to progress further on the path, to gain more positive qualities that will help us get closer to enlightenment and become a happier person ourselves. And so we'll look at those, the details of those later. Jason?
One other purpose might be to like understand, like philosophy, to understand reality, I guess. Or maybe science, to understand the physical world.
Explore these big questions. Where does the universe come from? And quantum mechanics, which they still haven't figured out. They're trying to, but trying to find answers to questions that haven't yet been found. I guess in the past, there were people who would go exploring parts of the world that had never been explored. I don't know if there's any places like that left. Maybe the bottom of the ocean. They're going to other planets. Yeah. So, but there, intellectually and in terms of science, there are always things that can be explored and understood. So,
Well, a purpose I've been thinking about a lot, maybe it falls under the last one, and it's kind of like from a Buddhist practice worldview. So, but just maybe it's just my purpose right now, maybe for the rest of this life, is to purify, create merit, and not expecting to get wise or very, super compassionate. And that relaxes me a little. Just focus on that.
Yeah. I mean, in Tibetan Buddhism, sometimes the teachings talk about attaining enlightenment in this very lifetime. There is that kind of notion, and that's what I was exposed to when I first started learning this tradition. And I really thought, oh yeah, I can get enlightened in this lifetime. Sure, why not? That's what I want to do. And after a number of years, I didn't seem to have made much progress and was feeling kind of discouraged. And then I heard the Dalai Lama say that actually, realistically, the majority of people, will not reach enlightenment in this lifetime. I think he even said, what did he say? He said, 1 in a million. 1 in a million will reach enlightenment in one lifetime, but most of us will take numerous lives. So that was a great relief to hear that. But, he's always encouraging us to think long term and, see that as a goal. long-term goal and just keep going in that direction, however many lives it takes, not having this frantic sense of I have to do it now. That's not really helpful. So I was very happy to hear him talk in that way. And I think a lot of us in the West, we tend to be super achievers, high achievers, yeah. And so the idea of becoming enlightened in this lifetime sort of fits with our personality, but maybe that's not so helpful. Yeah, it's good to have the wish, long-term wish, to reach enlightenment. I think of it as a long-term goal, but short-term goal is, much more realistic. Purifying, changing my behavior, becoming more virtuous, less negative, and so on. So doing as much as I can now, and then, doing more work in future lives. So one other thing related to this is, people might sometimes have the idea that as a Buddhist, we shouldn't feel grief. I don't know, we may pick that up from teachers or teachings or stories. Or we look at the image of the Buddha and he always looks so serene and peaceful, and we think we should be like that too and never, get upset or sad or anything like that. So I don't think that is a helpful view. And there's a story about Ananda, who was the Buddha's attendant. I think he was also the Buddha's cousin. And so he was really close to the Buddha for, I think, 25 years. He was just always with the Buddha, attending to the Buddha's needs and also listening to the teachings. So he was really, really close to the Buddha. But then when Shariputra, one of the Buddha's main disciples, passed away, he passed away before the Buddha did, Ananda was devastated. He just had a meltdown, you could say. Really, really, really sad. So that shows that even such a great disciple, I mean, he hadn't yet attained such high realizations, but he had certainly heard a lot of teachings and was with the Buddha almost constantly. So he observed the Buddha's way of doing things, but still he himself experienced a lot of grief. And then when the Buddha himself passed away, it says that there were a number of his disciples who were present, and some of those disciples were arhats. They had attained nirvana, so their mind was completely free of all afflictions. And they were calm. They didn't get upset. They were quite calm and accepting of what was happening. But other disciples who had not yet reached that state were sad and weeping. They were very upset about the Buddha passing away. And so those of us who are not arhats or even aryas haven't yet realized the true nature of things. It's just natural that we would feel sad and grief, and we shouldn't try to deny that or suppress that. That doesn't help. That is not a solution. So it's much better to be honest, acknowledge how we feel, and there are methods we can use to work with those feelings. I'll talk more about that as we go along. And seek help if we need, if we can't manage on our own to deal with the grief, then seek help from friends or teachers or even therapists. And accept that it could take time to work through those feelings. So anyway, I just thought to share this because, to me it seems that how we view life and the purpose of life and so on would affect the way we respond when we face difficult situations like the loss of a loved one. Okay, so then the next slide. So continuing to look at how Buddhists view life and death and loss, there's this list of 5 contemplations. They're sometimes called 5 remembrances. And these are from a sutra in the Pali Canon called the Upajjhatthana Sutta, meaning subjects for contemplation. But the wording here is changed somewhat from the words of the sutras. This is kind of a more contemporary rendering of the ideas. So the 5 contemplations, the Buddha recommended that people frequently contemplate these points. So the first one is, I am of the nature to grow old. There is no way to escape growing old. And the second is, I am of the nature to have illness. There is no way to escape illness. And third, I am of the nature to die. There is no way to escape death. So those first 3 are related to ourselves, to our own body-mind combination, our own aggregates. They are by nature impermanent, subject to change. In fact, they are changing, constantly. Every minute, every second, our bodies are changing. Our minds are also changing. But these are more related to our bodies. So as our bodies change, they are getting older. There's no way we can stop that, although people use lots of different products and procedures to try to cover up signs of aging, eliminate wrinkles and gray hairs and white hair and so on. But I don't know how long you can do that for. It seems like at a certain point you can't do that anymore. So eventually, yeah, you just have to give up and accept that, yeah, your body is aging. And aging in Buddhism, it's said that aging actually starts in the second moment of our life. The first moment we are born, and the second moment we start aging. So it's not just something that happens when we're 50 or 60, but it's happening all through our life, because just the nature of this body to change. And as it changes, it doesn't get younger, it gets older. But the real, I guess the main signs and experiences of aging start later, maybe in 30s, 40s, 50s, and so on. As you get older, then more and more of these occur. So this is simply the nature of having this type of body. And it's unpleasant to think about, unpleasant to face, but it's the reality. And I'll go through these and then I'll explain why the Buddha said we need to contemplate these. There's a reason for this. And then having illness, number 2. Some people have more illness than others. Some people are able to go through life and not experience too much illness. But yeah, I guess most people, it doesn't have to be serious illness, but even getting a cold or flu or fever can be quite unpleasant, quite, not a nice experience. So it's just in the nature of this body that we have, as well as the world that we live in, that there are different kinds of illnesses, diseases. And it seems like there's more diseases coming along all the time. Some may have gotten cured. People don't get those anymore, but then there's new ones appearing. And so it's like an ongoing thing to face illness and go through illness. And that's another aspect of life that is inevitable. And then the third one is, I am of the nature to die. So even if we don't experience much illness, and we also may not experience much in the way of aging, because some people die when they're still kind of young, relatively, but nobody can escape that. So everyone who is born will at some point have to die. And so again, these are things we don't really like to think about, but they are useful. And we'll look at why in a little bit. Okay, then number 4. So this is about others, the people and the things that we regard as dear and precious and love and so on. So they are also of the nature of change. So all that is dear to me and everyone I love are of the nature to change. There is no way to escape being separated from them. So this is accepting that, the people, the things that we value and cherish and want to keep with us and not want to separate from, but it's simply not possible. They are also subject to change and passing away or being destroyed or lost. And so inevitably, eventually, we will have to be separated from them. And then the 5th one is about karma. I am the owner of my karma, the heir of my karma. I have karma as my origin, karma as my relative, karma as my resort. I will be the heir of whatever karma, good or bad, that I do. So the first 4 points are more related to impermanence, accepting, becoming aware of and accepting the impermanent nature of ourselves, our body, our life, as well as friends, family, possessions, and so on. And this one, the 5th one, is about karma. So what this means is, karma is action, meaning the word karma means action. So this means that actions that we do, particularly those done under the influence of ignorance and attachment and anger, hostility, those are the 3 poisonous states of mind. So when one or more of those poisonous states of mind is present and is motivating actions that we do, then those actions become the cause of suffering, unpleasant experiences, bad experiences we have in the future. But even when we do actions that are positive and virtuous, like helping others, giving donations to charity and so on, doing meditation or other spiritual practices, so those are examples of positive or virtuous actions. But if they are done under the influence of ignorance about the true nature of things, our mind is still caught up in thinking there's a real, independently existing I and others and things, all of these things existing in this real, independent way as they appear. So we're still influenced by that. And even the virtuous actions that we do will be the cause for more experiences within samsara, furthering or perpetuating our existence in this cycle of death and rebirth and suffering. And so, what we wish to do, ideally in the Buddhist path, is to get ourselves out of samsara, to break free of this cycle of death and rebirth and suffering and confusion and afflictions. And to do that, we need to develop wisdom. But in the meantime, while we're in samsara, we're doing actions, we have to at least try to make sure we're creating positive actions, virtuous actions, so that we experience good results rather than bad results. So in this sutra, the Buddha said that people should reflect on these often, both monastics and lay people. And there are many Buddhist practitioners who recite them every day and contemplate them. And after mentioning these 5, the Buddha went on to explain the purpose, the benefit of reflecting on them. So with regard to the first, which is about, the nature to grow old, he said that people get intoxicated with youth and then engage in misconduct with body, speech, and mind. So intoxicated with youth. Have you ever been there? Yeah, I guess most of us aren't really so young anymore, but in our youth, in our earlier days, it was, just being young and on the threshold of life and being able to do all kinds of things, almost anything you wanted to do. So we probably all got intoxicated with that and all the possible things we could do, and we wanted to try them all, do them all. And so he said, when we get intoxicated with youth, then we can easily engage in misconduct with body, speech, and mind. We get up to naughty things, So I did lots of naughty things. So, but he said, but when we reflect often on how we can't escape from growing old, this intoxication with youth is either abandoned or diminished. Okay, so if at the time when we were young, if someone had said, you should think about how you're going to get old, we probably would have said, shut up, I don't want to hear that. But it may have been useful if we took it in that, we're not going to be young forever, and we're going to grow old, and we're going to experience the kind of difficulties that we observe with our grandparents and other, elderly people that we observe around us. That's going to happen to us as well. That might have sobered us a bit and helped us to calm down and not be so wild. So that's the real purpose. The real purpose is to tame our wildness and try to avoid engaging in non-virtuous, destructive actions, bad karma that would lead to suffering. And not just suffering, in a karmic sense, but even in this lifetime. If you really go wild, then you can end up in prison, breaking the law and having a prison sentence, or even getting injured, getting into a car and not driving properly and getting yourself injured or killed. So there's lots of dangers in being intoxicated with youth, problems that could occur in the immediate sense, here and now, but also in a more long-term sense if we are not careful about our actions and create non-virtuous karma. Then the Buddha went on to say something similar with number 2, I am the nature to have illness. He says we can get intoxicated with health, right? Good health. So those times when we are healthy, we're not experiencing any illness, then we can get totally, and I guess what he means by intoxicated maybe is complacent, like you just think, oh, I'm healthy, I'm not experiencing any sickness, let other people, too bad for them, but I'm healthy and strong and full of energy, as if that's going to last forever, as if we're going to be in good health forever. So we can take that for granted and be complacent. And then also, in that state of mind, we may engage in creating non-virtue, bad karma. So contemplating that, illness is something that happens to people as a result of having this kind of body, and that can, tame us, tame our mind, and help us to avoid creating non-virtue. And then the same with number 3. We get intoxicated with life. Sometimes people say, I love life. I love living, right? It's natural. But then in that state of mind, again, we can become kind of intoxicated with that, as if it's going to go on and on and on and never end. And so we don't do anything to prepare ourselves for the fact that we're going to die. And in that state of mind, being intoxicated with life, we again may engage in creating non-virtue, negative karma. And if, like number 5 mentions, if we create karma, then we will experience its result in the future. We're creating the causes for experiences that we ourselves will have in the future. So if we create non-virtue, bad karma, then we're creating the cause to experience suffering and problems in the future. So that's the purpose. The purpose of contemplating these topics is to help us be more careful about our actions, the things that we do, so that we, as much as possible, refrain from non-virtue and instead put our energy into creating virtue. And then with number 4, so this is to remember that the people and the things that are part of our life now and that we cherish and love and want to keep with us, they will not be there forever. There will come a time when we have to separate from them. And so this too, it's important to remember that, because he said, Buddha said, we can have desire and lust regarding the people and the things that are dear to us. And, on that basis, having that desire and lust, we may engage in misconduct. So doing that reflection that, they're not going to be with us forever will help us to subdue, to tame that desire and lust. And then the 5th one, this is to help us become aware of the importance of our actions, the actions that we do, so that we, whatever non-virtue we can completely give up, can stop doing, then we do that. Some actions we may not be able to completely stop at this point in time, but we can at least reduce them and have the aspiration in the future to stop them. Like killing, for example, it may be relatively easy to say, I'm going to stop killing, I'm not going to kill anymore, at least consciously, deliberately. But with other things like idle talk or even telling lies, those are things that are a little more hard to completely stop. But at least we can aspire to have attention, awareness, mindfulness of what we are doing, and really try our best to reduce them and eventually give them up. In the Buddha, in the sutra, the Buddha also went on to say, this noble disciple reflects thus: I am not the only one who is subject to old age, not exempt from old age. All beings that come and go, that pass away and undergo rebirth, are subject to old age. None are exempt from that. As he often reflects on this theme, the path is generated. He pursues this path, develops it, and cultivates it. As he does so, the fetters are entirely abandoned and the underlying tendencies are uprooted. And so he said that with all 5 of these. So that's the ultimate purpose of contemplating these points, is to realize I, as well as everyone else, am subject to aging and sickness and death and loss of loved ones and possessions, and subject to karma. So the more we reflect on these, the more we generate the wish, the determination to become free, to free ourselves from this situation. Because it's not something permanent that's going to last forever. It's a temporary situation, and we can get out of it. The Buddha himself was able to find a way out, and we can too. So that's the real purpose, is to engage in the practices to follow the path and pass through the various levels of the path, abandon the fetters. These are different types of afflictions in the mind that keep us stuck in samsara, and eventually become free of this. So that's the real purpose, the ultimate purpose of reflecting on these. But I still think that in a temporary sense, for now, it's helpful to reflect on these with regard to this topic that we're looking at here, grief, because the more we can understand and accept that these are realities, these are experiences that we and everyone else in the world goes through. And initially, of course, there'll be some resistance, some sadness, some, I don't want to think about this. But the more we get familiar with them and realize this is the truth, it's not just a question of believing and not believing, but it's obviously the truth, the reality. Buddha's just pointing out what is true. Then the more we become familiar with that, the more calm we can become and more accepting of them. And I think that doing that can help to relieve some of the pain of grief.
So with number 5, I've been a little confused about that one we're supposed to reflect on, because I've seen in other sutras, I've seen, like you said in that one, I've also seen it translated as I'm the owner of my actions, and I've heard that relating to actions of body, speech, and mind. And then I've seen other sutras where you're supposed to reflect on how the aggregate of essentially action, sometimes it's called volitional formations, fabrications. I think in this tradition it's conditioning factors, sankharas, how those are not me, not mine, not myself. But if they say mine, it sounds like not mine. It sounds like you're supposed to reflect on not being the owner, but then in this sutra, it talks about reflecting on being the owner of these sankharas. Do you know how to relate to the two different reflections?
So you're saying in some places we're advised to contemplate that we are not the karmic imprints. Well, the word karma does mean action, but in a loose way, it can also refer to the imprints of the actions that are left on our mind after we finish an action. So we do an action, that's over, but there's an imprint that's there on the mind and continues being part of the mind, unless there's some countermeasure to purify it, and eventually it will bring some results. So we often call that karma as well. It's probably a more technical term, like condition factors, the second link, or karmic formations, the second link. So you're saying in some places we're advised to not identify with those?
Yeah, so where he mentions he goes through the aggregates, like form is, it's impermanent, so regarded as not me, not mine, not myself, and goes on with the other aggregates, including what he calls action, volitional formations, fabrications, the sankharas, they're all sort of used as the same aggregate, which I think corresponds to the conditioning factors in this tradition.
Well, the fourth aggregate, sometimes we call it, what's it, volitional formations. Yeah, Venerable Children uses the term miscellaneous factors because it's kind of a big bag of everything left over that isn't included in the other four aggregates. So it does include karmic imprints, but it also includes a lot of mental factors other than feeling and discrimination, which are aggregate number 2 and 3. So all the other mental factors, which can include afflictions, but also virtuous mental factors, they're all included in aggregate number 4. So it's kind of a big bag of miscellaneous things. And yeah, so you're talking about where, meditation where we contemplate, we are not any of those aggregates. None of them is I.
Or mine. Specifically, it's the part where he says "not me," not mine, because mine implies ownership.
Oh, I see. And you're saying this seems to say something different here, which
that
says
they
I
are,
am the owner.
Right, they are mine. That my actions are mine.
Well, I think, I don't know, just off the top of my head, I think what the Buddha is trying to get us to realize here is that if we do actions, if I kill and steal and so on, then I have those imprints in my mind. Those imprints are part of my mind, and they will go with my mind into the future, and they will bring about bad experiences. And so if I don't want those bad experiences to happen, I've got to stop creating that bad karma and purify it. So I think that's the emphasis here. And then those other passages you're talking about, the emphasis is more on understanding selflessness, the absence of a, real fixed permanent self. So I think maybe, in those different places, different passages, the Buddha is trying to teach something different. That's what it seems like to me. So it's not really contradictory, but, the first thing we have to realize is about karma. We are creating karma. Yeah. And we have to be careful what kind of karma we create, because we're creating the causes for our own future experiences. So that's something we need to learn very early on the path, and straighten out our karma, work with our karma. So I think that's the emphasis here. Does that make sense?
So I guess I'm still not sure how to investigate, how to contemplate on it, but I can ask. I can work on that later. Thank you.
Yeah, to me it seems that the focus of this particular sutra is to get people to become aware that they're subject to these experiences of sickness, aging, death, and while we're going through our life, we are creating karma. And depending on what kind of karma we create, we will experience the results of that. So it's kind of it's a more basic teaching than selflessness. Teaching on selflessness is something more advanced. So I think after disciples, followers of the Buddha, understood these more basic teachings, then he would teach them selflessness. I think that's not contradictory, but just a different emphasis, different lesson.
Yeah, it just reminds me of Lama Zopa, where he would teach, and he might say, I, who am empty, am the owner of my karma, which is empty, And That's maybe one way to reconcile those.
Yeah, yeah. So even brand new people who may be listening to a Dharma teaching for the first time might hear that from Lama Zopa Rinpoche and probably wonder, what is he talking about? But it leaves an imprint, yeah. But there could also be people whose minds are ripe and ready for that, having maybe from past lives, they already have some familiarity with the teachings on emptiness or selflessness, and so they can relate to it. So, what was I going to say? Yeah, so after I talked about these last year in the retreat, and one participant gave the feedback that she found the first four depressing and suggested that I talk more about the fifth one. And I mean, in a way, it makes sense because the first four, there's not a lot we can do about. That's just how things are. And we can't really change that until we get out of samsara. So it's just like, oh, it's raining again. Yeah, growing old and getting sick and dying ourselves and then our loved ones and so on, also having those experiences. We can't really do a lot about that except come to accept those things, but we can't stop them at this point in time. Whereas the fifth one is something we can work on, and then that's doable. But I was also thinking about this person's comment about being depressed about those first four, and it's probably, yeah, other people feel that way too. They're not sort of joyful topics to contemplate. But then I was thinking, yeah, if you do feel depression when thinking about, aging and sickness and death, it could be good to have a kind of dialogue with your mind, and try to understand, why do I feel this way? Why is it so difficult for me to accept that these things are going to happen to me and everybody else? So explore that. And I was also thinking, what would be the alternative? Like, how would it be if we didn't die? Yeah, if we just went on living forever and ever and ever and ever and didn't die. Yeah, the world would be, I mean, could the world sustain all those people? Because, a lot of people would still want to have kids, and then those kids would want to have kids, and those kids, and nobody would ever die. So in a very short time, we would have zillions of people on this planet. And, could this planet support all those people? Would there be enough food for everybody? Enough space for everybody? Because of course everybody would want their great big house and their car and, float around the world on huge cruise ships and, all those kind of fun things. So yeah, so I mean, it's good to entertain that, to just think, well, how would it be if we didn't die? If human beings and other kinds of beings just went on living forever and didn't die? Would that really be something desirable? Something that you would like? Sorry? Yeah, take out the illness and the old. Yeah, right.
Yes, on a similar note, what would be the downside to having no illness? That seems like it would only be a positive.
If there was no illness. Yeah, yeah. I mean, in Buddhism, they do talk about other realms, and in like the God realms, the heavenly realms, there's lots of those, and some of them are in an area called the form realm, and there the beings have bodies of light that don't get sick, and they don't even have to eat. You know, they just live on samadhi. Their meditative concentration sustains their life, so they don't have to eat, they don't have to worry about food, going shopping, cooking, taking out the garbage, all those kind of things. And and they also don't commit any of the 10 non-virtuous actions. There's no killing, no stealing, no, you know, sexual misconduct. None of those things happen. So I thought they probably also don't need police and hospitals and mental hospitals and courts and all those kind of nasty things. So yeah, it's like a really nice place with very little gross kind of suffering. But it's still samsara. It's not a permanent situation. None of the heavenly realms, the celestial realms, are permanent. They're just rebirths that one takes as a result of creating the causes. Karmic, you know, you're still experiencing the results of karma, but eventually the karma to be born in those places runs out, and then you die. You leave that place and go somewhere else. And so, yeah, Buddhism does talk about incredible places where the beings have very little suffering and very long lives, but they still have afflictions. Their minds are not free of afflictions, they're not free of karma. So it's just kind of a temporary respite from the more gross types of sufferings that we have in this world, but not a real solution.
Kind of interesting, the person's comment, because the first four is in the middle scope, and the fifth one is in the initial scope, that she's able to hear the initial scope, but there's resistance to what is taught in the middle scope. So like, wow, that's pretty skillful of Lama Tisha, kind of. That, you know, these things are not easy to hear.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, death is in the middle, is in the initial scope. Yeah. Karmas. Yeah. It's dying again and again. Yeah. Melissa, wait for the microphone. Yep.
Yeah, I so when it said intoxicated with good health, and I thought, well, what is that? What's the problem with that? And I started thinking about it, you know, in youth, and that sense of feeling uh, just that you're invincible, and there's a lot of self-indulgence with that, and also it's kind of as I think an arrogant state of mind almost when you're young and intoxicated with good health and youth, and that is kind of the non-virtuous downfall, and that you don't see your interconnectedness and dependence on others, and and I think that when people become sick and vulnerable, that we become more compassionate, and that there's good things that come out of that. Um, so, because it was weird to me, it's like intoxicated with good health. Why is that a problem? You know, but there are some things where we just become so invincible, and we also, our society obviously thinks it's the best thing, which is interesting too. That's like another.
Yeah, I mean, if you yourself never experience illness, it's very difficult to understand other people who are experiencing illness. So you can be kind of, lacking compassion and even impatient with them, you know, like, why don't you get out of bed and do something, you know? So it can make us, kind of hard-hearted and, like you say, arrogant and lacking in compassion. And so that could lead us to, do things that are unwise, unskillful, non-virtuous, hurting others, and so on. And just taking things for granted, because sooner or later you probably will get sick, and then you won't be prepared for it and not be able to handle it very well. Get angry. You know, a lot of people, when they get sick, they get angry at their caregivers and doctors and nurses. They're really grumpy and nasty. So, yeah. So I think those are some downsides of being intoxicated with good health, not knowing how to handle it when you do get sick. Okay, so we'll stop there for today. And yeah, and then in the coming meditations, like tonight and tomorrow, you can meditate on these 5 remembrances, make yourself more familiar with them, and see what effect it has on your mind.